Hey, how's it going? So for today's video, we're going to be discussing body types and shape dynamics and how we can use that in our character designs to help us better communicate our ideas to the viewer. So essentially, whenever we're doing concept art or doing character design, we're trying to take an idea and turn it into a visual image so that someone looking at it can understand the idea that we have in our head. For example, if we have a thin or more agile body type, something like this, then that's going to say one thing about the character. And then if we have a thicker, more muscular body type, that's going to say another thing about the character. So we can use these small subtext clues in our design to help add backstory and give the viewer more information about the character that they'll immediately be able to pick up without even thinking about it. So with this in mind, we can think a little bit about what does each body type say about each character. So if you have someone extra bulky and thick, from a physical standpoint, that usually tells us that they're going to have bigger muscles, and so they'll probably try and solve problems through brute force or by smashing their way through things. Whereas if you have someone that's more agile or, a little bit slimmer, maybe they are a little more graceful. Maybe they think through their problems and find ways around them instead of trying to brute force their way straight through something. So by using these different body types and adjusting the character design based on the body type, we can help reinforce an idea by making sure the personality that we have for our character is backed up by the body type that they have. So the viewer can immediately get a hint as to what's going on within the design. All right, now let's take a look at how we can combine shape dynamics with different body types to achieve different looks and feels for a specific design idea. So we can take the same design idea, but by changing up the body type and the different shapes that we combine into that, we can take something and make it feel very different, even if it's generally the same basic concept. So we have sort of the squared off shape with rounded edges. We have different sort of triangles and curves that we can add. And these different shapes, when we combine them in different ways, will give off a very different sort of emotional impact to the viewer. And so we can use this to kind of control the way something looks. So if you want something to feel faster, we can make it more thin and add more angular triangles to it. And that'll start to give off a feeling of speed. Whereas if we want something to feel more powerful, we can bulk it up and make the shapes more rounded. Like here we have an idea of some sort of creature with this tripod leg setup. And on one side, it's much thinner, it has more spindly legs, has a taller body, so it gives it a different feel than something that's thicker with much broader legs and a rounded body. So it's the same basic concept, but the shapes themselves are making it look different and giving it a different emotional impact to the viewer. So we can use this concept for a lot of different ideas, and we can use it when we're exploring or ideating on a design by changing up the sort of thickness and shape on the same concept. You can come up with multiple ideas without having to redesign everything all at once. So here we have this sort of serpent creature, and just by changing up the thickness of the body, you can influence the viewer a little bit and have them get a better idea of maybe how this creature moves, maybe what sort of personality type or intelligence level it has. The thicker creature is going to feel a little bit more powerful. It's going to feel a little bit more, like obviously it eats more because it's a lot larger. So maybe it's more gluttonous. Whereas the thinner character here, maybe it's going to feel a little bit faster, a little more agile. Maybe it's a little bit more wily, has a little bit more of a cerebral approach to things. It's not always going to come across exactly like that each time you design, but we're just trying to help clue the viewer into what direction we're going and then we can just combine some of these different shapes together to help come up with iterations on our design. All right, so let's take a basic design concept and see how we can change or influence the perception of this character just by changing the shapes and the body type that we give it. So we'll do a demon design here and we'll just give it three major design points, and we'll make sure that each creation or each iteration that we create has these design points, but we'll see how we can change up the perception that the design has. So we'll do two horns, four arms, and then let's make sure it has like a tail to go along with that. So a tail as well. All right, so each design will have these design points, but we'll play around with the shapes and body type to see how we can influence your perception of the character based on which body type we go with here. All right, so this is sped up a little bit here, but basically we want to start with a stick figure, and we're just going to work in the basic anatomy real quick. And this first character, we're going to start with a thinner, more agile body type. And as we're doing this, we also want to think a little bit about the pose and the posture that the character holds. If he's a demon character and I want him to feel a little bit more sly and a little bit more mischievous or devilish and give him that feeling that he's up to no good, I want to use a posture that's a little bit more bent over. He's not standing up tall and proud of what he's up to. He's kind of being sneaky. So we want sort of bent over posture with the head thrust forward and kind of slouched. And then we're going to have the feet, the a little distance apart, but we don't want them crossed over. He's going to have a sort of like a ready stance in athletics where he feels like he can run quickly if he needs to, he can jump if he needs to. So just kind of like a basic stance with a bit of a slouched posture. And then we're just building up our stick figure here. We're adding, a little bit of thickness, some of these triangular shapes, doing a lot of these sort of trapezoid shapes with hooks attached to them to kind of get a feeling of sharpness and danger to the silhouette. Get a little bit of the anatomy worked in here, making sure we have basic muscle groups in the legs and in the arms. All right, now we're going to work the tail in. For the tail, we're just kind of doing a basic S curve or a modified S curve with some spikes on it. Get our two horns in. So here we kind of got basic demon. Now we just need to add the extra arms in. So make sure we have four arms. And here I'm making sure to use some overlaps. That way we can help our silhouette feel a little bit more three-dimensional instead of just flat. So anytime you have overlaps, it helps the shapes feel like they're existing in real space. There we go. Now we'll go and start on the next one here, and we're just going to duplicate it and work right over the top. Get rid of the limbs. Give them a slightly more powerful stance here, a little bit wider. Here I want to get rid of the major design points that I already have, since that's kind of what we're working on. Iterating is those main design points. So I want to get rid of those and start a new idea, but use the base that we already have established here. So here I'm thinking we give it a little bit thicker of a tail, have a little bit more lizard-like in the tail region. Change up the size of the horns and the direction the horns are going. So instead of having shorter front-facing horns, we'll have a little bit larger back-facing horns. Now we're going to move on to the next body type. So this is going to be a more muscular, sort of blockier body type. And the blockier and more sort of rectangular shapes we use, the more powerful it's going to feel. So I want to try and capture that feeling. So here the forearm area is going to be a lot more blocky and squared off. The shoulders we're going to make a lot more prominent and squared off. And then the neck is also going to be a lot more, you know, squared off, has a much thicker neck. So using this anatomy, we can hint at the fact that this character is going to be a lot stronger. And then by changing the pose up a little, having a slightly more upright pose, gives the impression that this character is probably a little more confident, or at least a little bit more outgoing in his demeanor and his sort of personality traits. So just some small things to try and keep in mind, like the way you pose him is going to also influence how the viewer sort of thinks about your character. So if you have a nice, strong, upright pose, they're probably going to think of that character as being a little bit more outgoing, a little bit more, talkative, or charismatic. Whereas a hunched over character is probably not going to be thought of as very charismatic or outgoing. So we add our horns in. Now we're thinking about, how are we going to put the extra arms in? Where's the attachment point going to be? So for the tail, we use a much thicker tail here just to help reinforce the idea that this character is thicker and more powerful. Another thing we want to think about while we're doing these silhouettes is the corners and sort of transitions from one shape to another. How rounded or sharp are those transitions and corner areas? The more rounded they are, the sort of softer and more friendly something's going to feel. Whereas the sharper they are and the more aggressive those edges are, the more dangerous something's going to feel. So, like in this silhouette here, instead of having more rounded, soft forms, I'm going to aim for having everything be sort of sharp and aggressive, and see if we can make him feel a little bit more dangerous than the last one. So add some triangles, and then make sure that as shapes sort of overlap or transition with each other, we have very pointed, hard angles on those shapes. We don't want it to feel too rounded and soft. Think more of like rectangles and triangles and less like ovals and circles. So by being sort of cognizant and aware of these different shape dynamics, you can influence sort of the subconscious, or you can influence the way someone's emotionally feeling when they look at a character without them even realizing that that's going to be how they feel as they look at the character. You know, you can sort of like, you're not hacking their brain, you're almost giving a very subtle nudge in the direction you want them to think. You know, so if you're using hard angles and triangles and everything looks very sharp, you can influence them to feel a little bit more uncomfortable about a design or make them feel like that design is less safe. Whereas if you're using very soft forms, circles, ovals, you know, very smooth transitions from one shape to another, it's going to feel a lot more friendly. You know, there's no points on it, there's no hard angles. So it's just going to influence the viewer to feel like something is safer. And this is just something that most people have sort of hardwired into their brain. It's just something we've developed from, you know, childhood, just interacting with the world. And so we want to try and use that built in sort of thought process so that the viewer can quickly gain information about your design. You know, people are going to be looking at these fairly quickly. Most people aren't going to spend, you know, more than maybe 10, 20 seconds looking at something. So you want to try and give them as much information as quickly as possible in a very sort of efficient way. And the best way to do that is using shapes within your silhouette. So here we're going to start working on doing a fat or large demon character. So we're going to change the body shape to be a lot more rounded in the midsection area. But we also want to try and maintain a few of these sharper edges as well, so that the character doesn't go from being, you know, this strong, bulky character to suddenly just this silly looking, you know, fat demon. We still want it to maintain a little bit of an intimidation presence. We still want it to feel kind of dangerous, but at the same time, you know, we're trying to show that this demon here is fat and sort of gluttonous and overweight. Maybe it loves eating, you know, poor unwitting souls. So we still want it to feel like a dangerous character. So here we're using a combination of hard transitions and triangles in the arms, you know, keeping those thin and triangular, but then making the torso and midsection sort of soft oval shape and combining those two together to create kind of an interesting look to the demon. So if we experiment with how we combine these in different combinations together, you can come up with some very interesting looking designs. So here I'm trying to get a tail that doesn't necessarily feel like it's getting any of the fat that the body is getting. You know, almost like a rat-like tail. You can have a giant, really fat rat, but it's still going to have that long, sort of tapered tail. So I'm trying to evoke sort of that rat feeling, like it's some sort of vermin, and kind of make the viewer feel a little bit uncomfortable by the way the tail sort of snakes out from the body. Here on this one, we're just gonna go full bore, like as fat as we can make this character and still have its feet touching the ground. So almost like it's just waddling through life. It's consumed so much that it's become a chore for this demon to drag its body along the ground. You know, it no longer walks, it almost like slithers because its stomach is just dragging everywhere that it goes. Now we're going to give it small horns. And by putting small horns on the head, we can emphasize and really draw attention to the fact that the body is so big. By making the horns smaller, it emphasizes the contrast of the body. Add a little extra meat to the arms. And maybe it's got some fat hanging down off of it. So give this exercise a try. See if you like it. See if you can try and capture different sorts of emotions or impacts to the viewer just by changing up the way you're combining body types and shapes together. Give yourself a prompt. Pick something easy that has the same sort of design points across all your silhouettes and just change up the shapes and body types for each one of those and just kind of play around and experiment and see what you can come up with. But hope this helps and hope this kind of gets you thinking more creatively about how you can add your shapes together.